Welcome back, chess friends. Here we have a painting that was created in 1508 by the teenage artist Lucas van Leyden. It's called The Chess Players. It looks perhaps as if the lady is winning and the gentleman is trying to act as if he doesn't care, whilst the members of the audience all have their own differing opinions. But what us chess fans would really like to know is whether this is a genuine game, and if so, what is really happening in the position on the board. Well, let's take a closer look and see what we can find out. So we can immediately notice that the pieces are rather unfamiliar to our modern eyes, and if we count the squares here, we can see that it's a 12 by 8 board. Now, I recently did a bit of research on historical chess variants for a previous video, in which I discovered that medieval courier chess was played on a 12 by 8 board. It started in the 12th century and was popular for around 600 years, and these longer boards were much more useful in a fight. Well, with all that said, let's proceed with the assumption that we are dealing with courier chess. So here's the starting position. The icons provided by my software are a bit different from the pieces in the painting, but let's quickly go over the rules. We know the rules because a man named Gustav Silenus wrote them down in 1616. The rook and the knight move as you would expect. The elephant leaps 2 squares diagonally at a time, and it's quite a weak piece because it can only access 12 squares across the entire board. Silenus called it the archer, but it was also known as the bishop, so the medieval bishop. This piece here, rendered as a modern-day bishop, moves like a modern-day bishop, but it was called a courier, and it was a very impressive piece for the time because it lent its name to the entire game, courier chess. This is the man, and it moves just like a king, except it can be captured. This is the king, which moves like a king, except it can't castle. This is the furs, which moves 1 square diagonally at a time, and this is the jester, which moves 1 square up, down, left or right at a time. And the pawns move as you would expect, 1 square forward at a time, and they capture diagonally, but they can only promote to furses, and the only time that they can move 2 squares forward is right at the start of the game when there is a prescribed opening sequence that both players have to follow, and it goes like this. You have to move your rook pawns 2 squares forwards, you have to move your furs pawn 2 squares forward, and you have to move your furs 2 squares forward in what was known as a joy leap. So there we go, that's the starting position with the prescribed moves, and the play continues from here. And one more thing, Silenus gave an illustration of the pieces. His ones were different again, much fancier and more detailed than the ones in the painting. So he's given us a king, a queen, which is the furs, the rook, the archer, the medieval bishop, the knight, this is a pawn or soldier, this is the courier, and you can see it's very important because it's very big. This is the man, and this is the jester. So very nice. Let's go back to the painting and see what we can figure out from the position of the pieces. So here I have taken the time to cut out the pieces from the painting and place them on my digital board. The lady's playing as black, so I've flipped the board so it's from black's point of view. There's actually a piece behind the lady's hand in the painting that's hard to see, so I've tried to zoom in and enhance it. It appears to be a tall, crowned piece, so sort of like this piece that's been captured off of the board. So I darkened this one and placed it in the correct position behind the hand here. It's pretty clear which pieces are the pawns, that's fine, but what else can we deduce? Well, this here must be a king's pawn, because remember during the prescribed opening, the furs pawn and the furs both had to move 2 squares forward. So this must be the king's side on the right as we look at it, and this must be the furs side on the left as we look at it. So what else can we deduce? Well, these 2 pieces look like they might be kings because they're big crowns, except that this white pawn would be putting this black king into check, and the lady's not moving to get it out of check, so it can't be a king. What else can we think of? Well, there are these 2 pieces here that remind me of the gourd from Monty Python, cast off the shoes, follow the gourd. Are they kings? Well, probably not, because you can see in the painting that there are 2 black gourds and there are 2 white gourds, and you can't have 2 kings on both sides, so it can't be them. That leaves us with these wedding cake shaped pieces in the middle of the board here. And it turns out that actually a 3-tiered king was pretty standard before the familiar shapes of Staunton were created in the mid-1850s. So here's an example of a 3-tiered king from the 18th century. And so let's fill in our board with a familiar king icon. Now, we also know that the elephant, or the archer, or the medieval bishop, was once represented as a piece with 2 tusks, which evolved into a split top, which eventually became the bishop's hat. So maybe this piece here is the elephant. Well, we know that the elephant can only visit 12 squares on the board, so is it one of those squares? Well, starting from C1, we can get here in 3 elephant leaps, so yes, it is valid. And it turns out that the only other piece on the board that's on a valid elephant square is the black king here, which it can get to from C1 with 1 leap, and also the white king here, which can get there 2 leaps from C8. And we know that these are kings already, so clearly this is an elephant. So let's talk about the piece that the lady is moving. It kind of looks like one of these pieces with the big round heads. It kind of reminds me of the Emperor Dalek. Each player has 2 of them. There's 2 white pieces here. There's a black one here, and the lady's moving a black one. So it has to be either a rook, a courier, or a knight. Well, it doesn't really remind me of a horse. The horse has been like a symbol of the knight forever. This piece here, in fact, looks more like a knight to me. It looks like it's got a horse's mane and maybe a face on it. And actually, it can reach this square in 3 moves. For example, here, 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 here. So let's fill this in as a knight. Now, if the piece being moved were a rook, then this must be a courier, and the lady is delivering a check on the white king protected by the courier. That makes more sense than the other way round, because if the piece being moved were a courier, then it would be undefended and the white king could just capture it. Additionally, there is another painting from 5055 called The Game of Chess. Here it is. And if we zoom in on this board, we can see that the pieces look like big acorns here. They appear to be rooks. So let's fill it in on our game board. And let's fill in these couriers now. Now, there are these 2 crown pieces on the furs side of the board, and they could be furs or jesters or men. Well, if they were jesters, they would have to travel, for example, from the first square on this column. The black jester would have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares, and the white jester would have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If they were men, they'd start on this column, and the white one would have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and black one would have to go 1, 2, 3, 4. However, if they were furses, they would have to travel less distance than they are on the first side of the board, and they're on valid furs squares. So maybe they are thurs. Let's count the squares. They go from the prescribed starting position, so the white one would come from here, and that would be 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. And the black one would have to come from here, which is just 2 squares for black. So it seems that these are furses. Let's fill it in. Now this last piece behind the lady's hand can either be a jester or a man. If it were a jester, it would need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares to get here, but it is on the man's side of the board, and it would only require 1, 2, 3 moves. So let's fill it in as a man. And that means that the piece captured off of the board here must be the jester. Finally, let's fill in the pawns. So now we've identified all of the pieces and we have a valid position. Now earlier I let the computer crunch the numbers and play out the rest of the game. So I now present to you 514 years in the making, the conclusion of The Gentleman versus the Lady from 1508. The lady has just delivered check on the white king using her rook backed up by the courier. This means that the gent has got only 2 squares he can move his king to. This would be the better choice because it would drag out the game for longer, but as we know, the gent's not the best player in the world, so he chooses g4 instead. So the lady moves the rook to g6, checking him again, and the king moves back to f5. But now the lady has the chance to pick up this pawn here. And at the same time, you'll notice now that the king is completely locked in. He's not in check, so the game continues, but the rook's covering these squares, the courier's covering this square, the knight's now covering this escape square, and the 2-square leaping elephant covers the remaining square. So there's not much that the gent can do. He decides just to move his furs to j8. Now the lady delivers another check, and you'll notice now that it's not checkmate because the courier is blocked from this square by the rook. So this gives the king somewhere to escape to. But don't worry, the lady knows what she's doing. She brings the man to c7. And again, you'll spot here that if she's allowed to bring the man to d6, this is going to be checkmate. This square's covered by the knight, all of these are covered by the rook, and the remaining squares covered by the man whilst delivering the check. So how does the gent get out of this? Well, he pushes d5, and this gives the king somewhere to escape to, but unfortunately for him, it also gives up the powerful courier piece. And this also reveals a check from the black courier piece here. So the king has to move, he's got one square. We now have knight to e4, and this threatens checkmate again, because if the man comes to d6, it's all over. So what does the gent do? Well, he decides to attack the black king with his furs, backed up by his pawn. This is also attacking the powerful courier piece here, but as we said, the lady doesn't mind, she knows exactly what she's doing. She moves the king over to g6, and again, if the man comes here, it's all over for the gent, so he decides to move his king out of the way. And we have knight to c5 from the lady. Again, she doesn't mind losing her powerful courier piece. And the gent does indeed take it, but it's far too little, too late, because the lady delivers check with the man to d7. It's backed up by the knight here, and it's covering all of these squares around itself very powerfully, and the king and the rook are covering the remaining squares. So awesome, awesome stuff. Thank you for joining me in this investigation, and I'll see you again next time.